When people do the guest sermons for the kids, they don't usually tell me what's going to happen in them. So I was cheated out of M&Ms. That's all I know. Psalm 78 says this, just a couple of verses there. It says, the men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant and refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. What in the world do men of Ephraim, great warriors, turning back on the day of battle, what do they have to do with raising the next generation? What do they have to do with parents discipling their children, or grandparents raising that next generation, or coming alongside the parents of their grandchildren? What does that have to do with those in our preschool and those teaching our teenagers and elementary students and everywhere else? And those of you without children, even who cry out for children in your life, but are given them here in this congregation at least to mold and to raise up. What does this battle language have to do with this? David Michaels, he was the pastor, the children's pastor at Bethlehem Baptist Church, which isn't actually that far away from here. He said something very profound. I want to make sure everybody's listening. I know I've been speaking for like 35 seconds. Some of you are asleep at this point, but try and wake up just for a moment, okay? Even in the balcony, that I never look up there, I'm told. Yep, you guys are awake, because it's super important that you hear this, okay? Because I am only going to repeat this like 14 or 15 more times in this sermon, so I need you focused on this. Very profound. He said, we need something. Something. And isn't he right? We need something. We got to have something. In fact, we all agree together the key to growing our church is that we have something. If we want people to come to our church, we have to have something for our children, right? There's got to be something for our children. If we expect this event, Club Valentino, if it's going to be well attended, well, we have to have something for the children, right? This is part of it. If we agree, we have to hire somebody. When Lisa's gone, we have to have something for the children. We got to hire somebody else. We got to have something for the children. We got to always do something. So we always hear, come to the mission meeting, the prayer meeting, the Bible study. We'll have something for the children. Check the website, check the bulletin. There's going to be something. You can even see it in ours, the little yellow with the parent and the little kid. There's going to be something for the children. We always care about having something for them, and this is so true. We as parents, teachers, pastors, whoever we are in this world who interact with kids, we must give our kids something. So I raised 3 kids. You've met all of them. They used to be very cute. This is what they used to look like. Oh, yeah. And they're beautiful. You just, real quick. They don't want me to show them too much because then I start crying. Remember the good old days? I'm worried about my kids. And I'm worried about your kids, not just mine. I'm worried that those kids might go through the same things that my kids went through. They might be hurt when they're picked last for basketball. They might get hurt when they are laughed at for something that didn't fit into the cultural norm for teenagers or whatever at that time. They might get hurt when their girlfriend breaks up with them. They might get hurt when they fail the test or when they don't have enough money as they're growing older, or when that heart disease hits them far too early in life, or they're going to lose and they're going to struggle and they're going to be frustrated and they're not going to get everything they want. And I'm worried about my kids. Do you worry about your kids sometimes? My boys aren't little anymore. 15, 18, 19, almost 20 years old. My oldest turns 20 in just a couple months. Throughout their life, I felt this battle to protect them from things in the culture. You know what I'm talking about here? You know, the bad things out there. And we all deal with this at different levels, of course, but everybody wants to protect their kids from something. Okay, we can't let our kids watch R-rated movies. It's really important. Keep them away from R-rated movies. But I've always wanted, I can't wait for my kids to see The Rock and Con Air and all of these great R movies that they should be in. Sorry, you might disagree with me, but these are awesome movies and they have to know about these movies, but they're not old enough yet. And so I'm waiting to bring them along to that. And I don't know what it is. And why am I so concerned with that? Why do we struggle with what it is that our children will think and do? And I mean, honestly, my kid, don't let them watch Deadpool because there's 60 plus F-bombs in there. They hear that before lunch every day. Oh, but we don't want to watch this sitcom because the sexual innuendos. This is all they talk about. This TV is not anything worse than what they have. The friends around them are giving them special brownies and talking about their conquests on a regular basis. You know what I'm talking about here, right? And it's not just the teenagers, 15, 18, 19. It's going down. It's in elementary school. They're talking about the same things in elementary school. And I'm not one of those guys who's like, oh, the good old days. Remember back then when life was so much better and they didn't talk about those things and there weren't F-bombs on TV and blah, 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 blah. That's not what I'm talking about, because my guess is that my grandparents' generation, some of your generation, you had enough sin too, right? Maybe not quite so blatantly in our face. That just means it was covering up some of the blackness in your hearts a little better. But we're all struggling with the same things. What is going to happen to our kids? What's going to happen to Lauren and Kendall and Annika and Jessica and Moses and Felix and Argie and Connor and Leo? And what's going to happen to your kids? So I read this book. It's been a bunch of years now since I've read it. In fact, the book is quite old. It's 26 years old. So the stats that I give you on this book, you're going to be a little surprising to you. Okay, 26, this is not this generation, this is last generation. When the day America told the truth. It's a survey given to a bunch of people and told that they could be anonymous. They would not have to, no names, anything like that. They could say that they could actually tell the truth about what they thought. So 26 years ago, they gave this survey, they published this book. And here, I just want to tell you a few things. 13% of people that are telling the truth here see all 10 commandments as binding on us today. 13%. 91% say they lie regularly at home and at work. That is, as part of their consistent everyday narrative, the things that they say is a lie. A third of AIDS carriers admit to not having told their lovers. Okay, remember 26 years ago. Here's the results when posed this question: what are you willing to do for $10 million? 10 million. Even today's, that's still pretty good, 26 years later. 10 million. What would you do for this? 25% said they would abandon their families. 23% said they'd become a prostitute for a week. 7% said they would kill a stranger. 10 mil. Our kids are in danger of becoming killers and thieves and liars and cheats. And we're raising our children to one day maybe abandon their families if there's enough in it for them. Now, some of you might have struggled with these things. Some of you might have some of those things in there. Most of you probably don't struggle with those yourselves, and your kids aren't in that situation. So the bulk of you, it's not that you're worried they're going to become all of that. What we're worried about more is that our kids will be average. Aren't we? I don't want average kids. I don't want to lose my kids to the norm, the status quo, social neutrality. I don't want that. I mean, this person, this child growing up, they're not evil. They're not Hitler. They're not Stalin. They're just average. Average, we don't want our kids to be average. They do little things wrong in the world. Most workers admit to goofing off 7 of their 40 hours at work. That means they're stealing from the company 7 hours. And half admit that they call in sick when they're perfectly fine. Term papers downloaded by the thousands and said that they're their own work. And it's not just those people. You're like, yeah, that is the way the world is, and I got to protect my children from that. No. These are church attenders in there. The church statistics versus the non-church are not hugely different. 43% of non-church admit to stealing work supplies. 37% of church attenders do. Not a huge difference. 17% of unchurched use the company phone call for long-distance personal calls. 13% who attend worship do the same. 17 versus 13%. Some of you are thinking, this is 26 years old, isn't it? What in the world are long-distance phone calls? I don't even know what that... Okay. Now, some of you remember when we had to pay for those things. I had to talk with my girlfriend at the time who lived 25 minutes away. It was a long distance call, $60 a month it cost me to talk to her. Whew. And real Christians, not just church attenders, and there is a difference, isn't there? A lot of people in the church don't belong to Christ. But real Christians, people who are committed, still say that they falsify their income taxes, they commit plagiarism, they bribe to obtain building permits, because that's just the way business is done now. They ignore construction specs, they illegally copy DVDs or computer programs, they steal time, they exaggerate products, they tell people what they want to hear, they selectively obey laws. This is the norm. This is the kids who are just the norm. I don't want average kids. I'm worried that my kids and your kids will grow up to be average. I want so much more, not just kids who aren't addicted to drugs and aren't killing people, but I want people who aren't average. I want my 3 boys to be something more. I need them to have something. So they need something. What do they need? We know what they need. If we don't want them to be scary and we don't want them to be average, then we give them discipline when they're young, right? Give them discipline, give them ambition, help them understand what a good work ethic is. Then they won't be average, they won't be normal, they will be on top of things, they will do well in life, they'll be all that they can be. And then we lose our kids to the extraordinary, and I am just as worried about that. I'm just as worried that my kids will grow up being exemplary, wonderful, good citizens, that they'll prosper and they'll be well known and they'll make it in the world, so much more than average. Won't it be great? Oh, my son has done so well in life. He's got true friends around him. He doesn't struggle. He retired when he was 60, even before the 62 mark. Isn't that great? And that's what we care about. As Christian parents, I am not concerned that my kids will grow up to be like this. I'm just as concerned that they'll grow up to be like this. And there's nothing wrong with those things. There's nothing wrong with sailing and playing golf and leading well at work and having the nice white picket fence and all these wonderful things, but they are not the goals for Christian parents. I'm scared to death that my children will become this because so many are. So many in our church is growing up to be successful, and I consider this to be a desperate and terrible state if there's not more. And I hope you agree with me. I hope our kids need something more than a work ethic and discipline and drive to get ahead. I know our kids need more. What we must give our kids is hope for the future. Not hope in the American dream, not hope and success and the white picket fence and the 2.5 kids. Not hope that comes from being financially stable. I'm talking about true hope. Our problem is that our kids don't have a vision for the future because we don't have a vision for the future. We've never stopped long enough to figure out why we're doing what we're doing, why we exist in this world. We consider this to be an extra beautiful thing, having our children, and we forget that there is a purpose that God has given you those children for. Our goal has remained something like, well, at least I've done something. I've done something more than the neighbors have. Look at their kids. My kids are successful. They've done well. At least I've given them something. I don't want something for my kids. Or your kids. Our children are so much more significant than that. And although I illustrated that by behavior, it's not even behavior that I'm most concerned with. Behavior it shows what's going on in the heart. I'm much more concerned with the heart. I don't want my children growing up to obey the laws. We talked about this a little bit, and it got a little scary in the Sunday school, but we'll hopefully wrestle with that a little bit more next week. But it's not about obeying the laws. It's about listening to the voice of God, and that's different. It's about teaching our children to be wise It's about grabbing hold of their hearts and their souls. J.C. Ryle, a great pastor of yesteryear, says, this is the thought that should be uppermost on your mind in all you do for your children. In every step you take about them, in every plan and scheme and arrangement that concerns them, do not leave out that mighty question, how will this affect their souls? The chief end of their lives is the salvation of their souls. How will this affect their soul? Is that what's primary in our heart? Is that what we're thinking constantly as we're raising this next generation? How does what I'm doing right now, soccer practice, how does going to school, how does sitting at this kitchen table, how is the time they're spending on their phone, how does this grab and glorify, how does this take care of their souls? And I don't think J.C. Ryle, knowing him as I do, he's got a great book. It's out there on the book table that they were talking about earlier, and you need to grab it. Some of the things that parents should be thinking about. I don't think he's thinking about the most important thing is that you get our kids to bow and next to their bed at 8 o'clock when they're going to bed and say the sinner's prayer. I don't think that, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. It's a great moment that you can mark in history and put in their baby book, but it's one piece of their salvation. The reformers have always said salvation, justification is very important, but so is this whole other part of soteriology. Salvation is not only when you come to Christ, it's staying with Christ. Christ has saved us, and he is saving us, and he will ultimately save us. This whole path, if you think you're somehow done after your child has said some sort of a prayer and a tear has come to your eyes and you've told your friends and called them up and everything is great with your kids, you aren't caring for their souls. That's a step in a journey that your children will not end. That, by the way, you grandparents, grandparenting and grace that Larry McCall is talking about later, it's still not over as you lead your children, not your grandchildren or great-grandchildren, even your children. They're still hopefully seeking wisdom from you, and you're still called to give them. Maybe you don't give them commands anymore, but you still give them this wisdom. Their souls are so much more important than giving them allowance and ethical lectures and new cars and whatever you think is good for your kids, and none of those things are wrong things. There's so much more. Let me answer this big question of how do we give hope to our children by answering this smaller question. What are our children? And I'm going to deal with this a lot next week. That's the main thing is Psalm 127. But it tells us what our children are. You probably know this even though you don't know it's from Psalm 127. Children are a gift from the Lord. Is that true? Children are a gift from the Lord. They're like arrows in the hands of the warrior. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full. Do you hear the significance this text puts on your children? They are so much more than mere arrows in a quiver. Like we put quiver full on our license plates or on our bumper stickers, or we'd like this idea of quiver full. Look at my arrows. Aren't they nice? This is a very sharp arrow. It is the best looking arrow ever, isn't it? Look at my arrow. Oh, and it says yes, ma'am, and no, sir. Yes, very good arrows. They've done their job well. But arrows are so much more. Arrows are designed not to be looked at, but to be shot at the enemy. We'll talk greatly about that next week. We've got to give them something more than something. It's not just this thing from parents where we have this mediocre idea that our children will be more than average, that our children will grow up to be something better than others. But no, there's this huge vision, there's this plan, this strategy. Do you want to give your children a vision? Have you thought through this? And by the way, again, I'm not talking about just the 3-year-olds. I'm talking about the 10-year-olds and the 18-year-olds and maybe even the 45-year-olds, depending on what your relationship is with your children. You can still give them a vision for the future, not just something, a plan that comes out of a vision. And as a church, we must cultivate this. But hear this. This is me preaching from the pulpit and bringing Jesus into this whole thing as I'm going to do. But it is not my primary task to train your children. It is not Pastor Andrew's primary task to take care of your youth, or Hannah's, or all the other wonderful people who volunteer on Wednesday night and Sunday morning. Even right now, people are doing that. It's not their primary, it's not the preschool teacher's primary job. They are to help you mold your children in the right direction. They're to come alongside of you and give you resources and help support what it is that you are doing as individual parents in their lives as this community comes together. Can you imagine, wives, can you imagine if your husband said, I'm gonna come home Friday night, I want you to be ready. And on Friday, this is gonna be this fantastic date. You need to be ready at 7:00. But honestly, I've been on a date. I've been on like 40, 50 dates in my life. I'm okay at it. But I've hired a professional dater because he's so much better at it than me, right? And you wives are thinking, actually, that doesn't sound all that bad. So ideally, right? You're like, no, I want my sweetheart to learn. I want you to study this. I want you to think about this. I want you to take me seriously. I want you to take me on that 7:00 date. And I know you're not as good as the professional, the person who spends all of his time studying about these things, but I want you. And this is what the children need. They need you. They don't need the professionals. Hannah's job, my job, Andrew's job, our job is to help come alongside you and hold you up to be able to do this job. It's not our job. Let me give you the vision. 78, Psalm 78. We're finally back to Psalm 78. The vision comes from this. And this is not, I'm not suggesting that this is the vision of Warsaw Evangelical Presbyterian Church. I won't get to mold that, right? There's probably already a vision out there. I should have asked about that. There's already an idea. This is the vision that I have for children, period. This is bigger than all of those smaller ones. This is so that the next generation might hope and delight in God and not turn back in the battle. And you can hear in that our greater vision that you see right on the front here, that we hope only in Christ and we show him as beautiful and bring joy to our city and the world, that the next generation might hope in Christ, delight in him, that is, find joy in him, and not turn back in the battle. What does Ephraim have to do with this? What do these warriors have to do with it? Let me show you. Psalm 78. If you've got Bibles, go ahead and look at it. Or if you've got phones, scroll there or something like that. Psalm 78. Mine got messed up, so let me see here. I have to find it along with you. Psalm 78, verses 1 through 11. And you've heard it already. The winds read it to you this morning. 3 generations read it together. Oh, my people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, what we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our forefathers to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. They wouldn't be like their forefathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, whose heart was not loyal to God, whose spirit was not faithful to him. The men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant. They refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. Ephraim looked strong and ready. I can imagine this in my movie-addled brain, right? I can see them coming out, and they've got their bows, and they are ready. They're dressed in their warrior gear. These are the men. They're ready. And it says that they turned back. They retreated. They turned and ran from the battle. Why? It says they forgot his commands. They didn't keep his covenant. Again, Sunday school was about this commands and covenant and how they work together. And there's a lot of mystery there, but this at least, perhaps our children are ingrained in this scary behavior or this average behavior because they've forgotten the covenant. Perhaps even they've become exemplary and extraordinary children and grown into extraordinary young men and women, and still they've forgotten the covenant. Again, don't mistake that behavior is the main thing that I'm trying to get at here. Behavior is the outflow of the heart, and a heart filled with hope will overflow into the community. It will show itself. So behavior is relevant, but it's not the main thing. They don't turn back. They turn back in the battle because the relationship, they've forgotten this relationship with God, this covenant that they have. They're not keeping his laws. because the relationship has started to go away. Why did they forget the covenant? I got to wonder, maybe the previous generation didn't tell them about it, as this verse talks so much about. It's implied here. The author of the psalm says they will give utterances, open his mouth, he'll not hide the information from them. So it looks like they've tried to give this information out, but perhaps they've done a poor job. How could something like the relationship between God and man not be handed down well? We actually don't know if it was really given to the next generation or not, but if it was done poorly. Certainly, some might forget, but a whole generation would forget? Something is wrong. They've bought into some system, some dream, some other understanding. The whole generation has failed to see God's covenant, this relationship. They've put something else before that relationship. How can this be? How can the covenant not be remembered? And do you hear what this covenant is? Think about this. It's the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. How does that get forgotten? I can imagine people going through the Red Sea. Maybe they're carrying their little one, and over the next few years, they're telling that as he grew up. Oh, let me tell you about that Red Sea experience. Oh, it was awesome. As Joshua is telling the next generation about the walls that have fallen at Jericho. Let me tell you, kids, about this. We just marched around it, and then they felt like we didn't even do anything. That's how awesome God is. Look at these wondrous deeds, and you've got some of those in your life, don't you? You get some of those wonderful deeds, and how in the world does that kind of an understanding of God come to the fact that you don't end up talking about him? How do we get to, okay, everyone, let's do catechism question number 93. Let's hurry it up because the game is about to be on. How is it that God's mighty deeds are forgotten? Because we've bought into this other system. We're like, okay, let's read Psalm 78 together. Let's read Deuteronomy 6. We read that as our call to worship this morning. And you can just imagine we've just forgotten about this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and something, I don't know. It doesn't matter to us anymore. We've stopped giving our children a vision. Our children aren't continuing the battle, and part of the reason is because they haven't been told how important this battle is. They've been told that this dream over here is more important than the battle that God has equipped you to equip your children with. You haven't bought into this battle. And so your children aren't either. They're happy with the American dream and they're missing it. It's being stolen right out from under them. This whole new world that they can walk in. They're happy with this one. They've got these blinders on. You remember my first few months here. And they've missed this new world. We're so good to give them, give them like Harvard, give them Yale, give them some fantastic school in the future, and they can eat at fancy restaurants. They can be a partner in that law firm, and they're in deadly peril. We don't teach them to deal with suffering and martyrdom. And this, just, where is the danger in this world? Where are we equipping them for battle? Or when they see the battle, they're like, no, thank you. Because they haven't seen the beauty of the wonderful deeds of God. They haven't seen this new world. The worship design team meets every single week, Andrew and Ben and Judy, and we were talking about different things to do in the children's sermon, and one of them talked about, I don't remember who, talked about this game of life. You guys play the game of life before? And you know what it is, right? You go, you get your car, and you're in your car alone, and then you have to decide whether you're going to take the college track or not college track. And if you take the college track, you do much better in life, right? So make sure you try to take the college track. That's what we're thinking. And then we get a wife, and I don't remember if she cost us or anything, but she actually cost us a lot. And then you keep going, right? And you get 2.5 kids or however many kids, and all along the way, you're trying to avoid the pitfalls of bankruptcy, and where are you trying to get over the hills, and as you keep spinning it, and finally you get to millionaire mansions. Yay! We've won. We've succeeded at life, and nowhere along the line is there suffering for Jesus, martyrdom. I make a stupid game probably, but you get the point. right? Maybe when you're playing that, you'll throw that in there somewhere, or at least you'll remind your children, because as Jeff prayed, right, we were supposed to remind them whatever we're doing, when we're driving in the car with them, when we're laying in the bed, whatever we're doing. We're going to show them the wonderful deeds of God. Do you remember Eli and his children? Eli was prominent. He was special. He was a priest. Everybody looked to him, and his children were blowing it. And God came to him and said, why do you honor your sons more than me? I'm sure he was raising his children to be happy. Everything was fine. And God took them. I'm so afraid that maybe in my desire to love my children so much, to take care of them, to make them happy, that maybe one day I'm going to have to agree with God as they're justly condemned because they haven't seen the praiseworthy deeds of God. I want them to be happy, but I want them to be happy in Christ. Have you asked your children this? Try this sometime. What are mommy and daddy most passionate about, most happy about? What is most important to us? If you don't hear something like the covenant with God, following this Jesus, the beauty of the cross and this new covenant, if your kids aren't saying something about this relationship that you have with the King of the world, the one who has done wonderful and great deeds that we sang about, that Judy so set up in our and choir and orchestra, everything has been pointing to these praiseworthy deeds. If they're not hearing that, maybe not in so highfalutin language, but something like that, then maybe we've missed out. Maybe we've missed the mark in what we're supposed to be training. Maybe you haven't given them the vision that is so important to them. Are you training your children to triumph in the right things? Are you training them to triumph ultimately? I'm excited about what we can do to train our children for triumph, fitting young soldiers for the greatest combat ever. I'm excited to make my house a fortress for protection, a hospital for healing, a supply depot for replenishing the troops, a retreat center for R&R, and a launching pad for missionary zeal as I shoot these arrows out. That's what my home is. That's what this church should be. That should be our whole goal in life, that Christ would be known and treasured, and that our next generation would see that and feel that. Are you training your kids to triumph? Andrew's going to get to elaborate on this in a couple weeks. I get one more week, and then he's going to take all the practical things. He's going to show how the church comes alongside and brings kids up in training them in Scripture, how they read Scripture, and how they pray these kingdom prayers, so much more than just praying for Aunt Ethel's marbles, I don't know, whatever, hurt leg or whatever, which are wonderful things. But big kingdom kinds of prayers. He's going to talk about how sacrament feeds into our children and why it's so significant that they're here. That's not just some mere ritual. He's going to grab hold of our hearts in that area. He's going to show us what disciplining our children looks like. What does it mean to discipline them? Because that's very important. But even more than all those things, there's loving your spouse. Are you loving your spouse more than your children? They need to see that. You want to raise your children well, love their mother or father well. Are you spending time with them? Not just quality time, quantity time. Are you there with them? Are you showing them joy in suffering? Prepare them to suffer, because I guarantee you they will. And if they're not ready, if you haven't prepared them, then they will probably fail. Are you calling them to be humble? That their God doesn't fit in some neat little box that you've explained to them, that you've allowed God to be free and powerful? Have you apologized to your kids and shown them where it is that you've made mistakes and how you want to grow? Have you taught them to be generous with their M&Ms and with everything else? Do any of you still have your M&Ms on the mirrors? Have you told them what they're for? Have you shown them that the 3-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 16-year-olds should be on missionary trips with you, so that they can see the way the rest of the world lives, so they can know that God doesn't love America most. He simply loves America. And America has been blessed in certain ways. You've been blessed in certain ways so that you might bless the world. That's the reason that you've been given much. I could go on, but Andrew will take care of all those things, and he'll be way more awesome at it. This series is about triumph, preparing our children to win the battle. And friends, this battle is dressed in the nice, neat veneer of the American dream. We think we've got it. But the call of the kingdom, which is stolen away sometimes by the American dream, the call of the kingdom comes from the King himself, the one who took our place on the cross and calls us to follow, to take up his cross. It's not for us to be better. The call of the kingdom is not, well, just be better. Don't make sure that your kids don't say 4-letter words, and make sure they don't have sex before marriage, and make sure they don't punch their friends in the sandbox, and make sure they stay away from the liberal agenda, or give 10% of their income and do their devotions every day, because these are the things that'll make. That's not it. It's not about all these behavior things. It's about resting, trusting in the King. It's about resting in Jesus. Not working harder, resting more, not pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, but trusting the one who already has done the work for us. Yes, this still means on the other side that we call our children to something. Yes, it means that they have to follow some sort of commands. Yes, it means that we give them a vision of Jesus that is so big and so beautiful that it can't be stopped by mere things like this American dream. This Jesus, he defeated death on the cross. Death and darkness and evil are gone because of what he did. And he calls us into this relationship, this covenant, this strategy for worldwide domination, where Jesus will be king of all and all will bow the knee. And I want my children to be a part of that. If you think that you get to teach the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord without basking in those praiseworthy deeds of the Lord yourself, you have missed it. You must be first. You must look at these praiseworthy deeds that he's given us throughout Scripture and that you've seen in your grandparents' life and your parents' life and in your own life. Bask in these things. Show these things to your children. Give them the power of the cross. Give them Jesus. If you don't know how to do these things, keep coming to these. Okay, Andrew's going to rock it in a couple of weeks. We've got a book table out there. We have a guide like papers out there. I think maybe they'll be out here next week that tell you some of the things you should be reading or helping your kids with, or giving your kids devotionals with. Some great ideas from some of the staff. Give them Jesus. Please don't give them this dream that's out there. Give them Jesus, the one who calls them to so much more. Don't just give them something. Give them Jesus. Let me pray.